our next guest is a person who has been working in the GMC, and she's done many reforms for the doctors working here in UK to practice. She's Mrs. Anna Rowland, who is Assistant Director of Policy at General Medical Council, and she will be sharing with us the fitness to practice procedures in GMC policies, and they all affect us, the doctors working UK, and APS UK has been actively involved in these programs along with the BME forums. And I would like to request Anna Rowland to please proceed to the podium for a lecture. Thank you.
Morning. Thank you very much for asking me to come and join you, and I'm very pleased to be here. My role at the GMC, I've been there 8 years, has been entirely around trying to make things better, and that's always treading a difficult line between patient safety and fairness to the doctors involved and their experience. So I just wanted to share a bit about that journey. So I think all organisations that handle complaints across different regulators but also different jurisdictions have experienced a spike in complaints. So this is not just the GMC and it's not just the UK. I think it's a lot to do with changing social patterns and the internet, and people have got much more used to complaining. But we are seeing that slowing and in fact reducing somewhat in the last couple of years. So our complaints are down 7% compared to 2014. We still get most of our complaints from the public. So the vast majority come from patients or their families. But actually, in terms of the ones we take forward, it's a much smaller percentage of the complaints we get from the public. So only 15% compared to 80% of complaints we get from employers, which we take forward. So you can see there the sort of pattern of increasing complaints, and then it's starting to come down slightly. So I think a real focus for us in probably about the last 5 years has been about stress. So the system we have was introduced 2004. It came off the back of the Shipman inquiry, but there had been a whole range of medical scandals in the late 1990s, where I think the sort of social mood was that there needed to be a very clear and firm system for protecting patients. But I think what we found out the back of that is about that important balance. So of course, patient protection has to be an absolute priority, but there is something about making sure that it also deals compassionately with the people who are being investigated. And so I think some of the concerns that people who find out they have an investigation about to start, some of the things they worry about are the impact on their career, how long will it take, this being disclosed to their employers, that there might be a public hearing, the press may report on it, and also how long that information will continue to be published. So some of the aims that we have to tackle some of this is about complaints being dealt with at the right level. So again, the system we have is very much focused on if something is serious, it should come to the GMC. But actually, I think our view is that lots of clinical issues can be resolved and should be resolved locally. Actually, we're quite constrained by our legislation in that respect, but we are pushing for change, and we are trying to work within the system we have to ensure that clinical issues that can be resolved locally are resolved locally without getting us involved. We should only investigate where necessary, and we should conclude those investigations as swiftly as possible. We're very interested in a consensual approach. So this isn't about issuing a punishment, it's about putting a public protection in place. And if we can do that by agreeing with the doctor what needs to happen, then that's our preferred approach. And we're investing a lot of effort in sensitive handling of our communication with the person under investigation. Even if a serious outcome is necessary, their experience of their interaction with us should be as sensitive as possible. And we're looking at making sure that the publication of the outcomes is transparent but also proportionate. So just a bit about our legislation. I said it came in 2004. I mean, that was a time when the local systems for handling things were much weaker. And so that's how the legislation's been drafted. I think probably a lot of doctors in the UK don't realise we don't have a discretion. If we receive a complaint that raises a question about fitness to practice, we're required by law to investigate it. It's quite an inflexible system. So we've asked for change. We would like a discretion about what to investigate. What we would do with it is focus more on local systems and our interaction with local systems to deal with clinical issues. And we would like greater powers to agree things. We do have some, but they are limited. So just a bit about what have we been doing to make things better and to get that balance right. So we set up an employer liaison service. We have GMC experts now that work with every employer and every trust in the UK, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. That's to make sure that when an employer sends us a referral, it is the right one. So to get that consistency of referral across the whole of the geography. We set up a new tribunal service about 5 years ago. It is run by the GMC, but it is separated from the rest of the work of the GMC. It is led by a senior ex-judge who reports directly to Parliament. That was all about giving confidence that if the GMC brings a case against a doctor and there's a hearing, that hearing will hear that impartially, both as to the doctor's defence and the GMC's case against them. We've invested a lot in making sure that our decision makers have a diverse makeup, are trained both in decision making and also in issues relating to the diversity of our population. We've set up doctor and patient support services, so every doctor and patient that's involved in an investigation will have free, confidential, emotional support throughout the process, including someone to go to a hearing with them. We now meet doctors and patients during investigations. We didn't used to do that unless there was a hearing. Well, our focus for that is that everybody understands what's going to happen and that they share information with us as early as possible so that we can avoid over-escalating things simply because we don't have the information. That has reduced our hearings by about 40 a year. I think we could do more with that if we could get our legislation changed. We used to make inquiries of employers in low-level issues, and we don't do that anymore. We now send them to the doctor's medical director or responsible officer. We've started using a little power that we have that was probably not intended for this, but is proving very useful to make early inquiries. So now when we get a complaint, if we think there's even though it meets our legal test, if we think there's a possibility that early on we will discover that there isn't something, that there's no evidence or it's not as serious as it looks, we can make these early inquiries, and that's managed so far to reduce investigations by about 600 a year, and I've got more plans for that. We're rolling it out in bite-sized chunks just to make sure we do it carefully. And we're introducing from January new time limits on how long we publish sanctions against doctors. We've had a lot of work about safeguards for doctors in the process. So whistleblowers has been a big issue in the UK, about employers punishing doctors for whistleblowing in the public interest by sending them to us. So we commissioned an independent review, and we have got a whole range of safeguards in place now, so that very early on, employers have to tell us if a doctor's a whistleblower right at the start, and very early on we go out and we look for independent evidence. That's evidence independent of the organisation involved in the whistleblowing. And a whole series of changes to improve how we deal with doctors who might be under investigation and themselves vulnerable. So training for staff, we've got a specialist team now to deal with that. We try and give single points of contact to doctors so they're not being passed around during the process. We try and coordinate all our correspondence with doctors who are under investigation so that they're not getting multiple communications from different bits of the GMC. Support services, we've reviewed all of our communication to make sure the tone is as supportive and sensitive as possible. In terms of what next, we're looking at what other types of cases we might put into that provisional inquiries part of our process. So this is all about, there absolutely are circumstances when we need to investigate. There absolutely are situations where serious action is needed to protect the public. But actually at the outset, when we get a bit of information, we always don't know whether it's one of the ones that's going to end up being in need of that action. And those provisional inquiries can help to resolve that much quicker with much less stress. And we're exploring ways that if we don't get the legal powers we want for consensual outcomes, is there more we can do within our current legislation?
2 minutes.
Thank you. We've introduced induction for all doctors new to the register. That's UK qualified doctors and overseas doctors. It's not mandatory. We are thinking about that, but it's something we offer. And it covers what's different about UK practice, what are the key things people need to know, what are the duties of a doctor, what's the day in the life of a GP. Lots of the issues focus on consent, confidentiality, some issues around duty of candour, managing social media. So the things that we've learnt are the areas that most often get doctors into difficulty. So just very quickly, I was just going to focus on a couple of case studies. So the first one is a doctor prescribes antibiotics over the phone to an intravenous drug user with an abscess. He doesn't ask as many questions as he should, and he doesn't advise immediate attendance at hospital. Next day, the abscess bursts and the patient ends up in intensive care. Our focus here is protection. We're not a punishment body. So we'll be interested in, is this doctor safe for the future? So we'll be looking at how has the doctor responded to this, what have they learnt, are they likely to do it again, have they taken any retraining that might be necessary. If we're reassured of all of that, this wouldn't necessarily result in us needing to do something. The other one I'll just quickly touch on is the last one. A doctor lied about their qualifications and forged a reference. They were dismissed and referred to us. They then lied to get a new post saying that they weren't under GMC investigation. We suspended them. They lied about that to a locum agency, and when challenged said that their mother had died, which was why they had done those things, and that turned out not to be true. This is the sort of thing that ends up with a very, very serious outcome. It's very likely that doctor would be removed from the register. So the sorts of issues are around very serious misconduct. Not a mistake. We know doctors can have a lapse in judgment, and if it's not going to happen again, then we're comfortable with that. Okay, I'll stop there.
I think there's time for a couple of questions. First, Dr. Sohail Chugtai.
Sohail Chugtai, orthopedic surgeon. It's a very enlightening talk. We really wanted to hear this perspective of medical practice. Two brief questions. Laws about telemedicine, especially giving assurance to the insurance companies that this doctor is protected for one-off consultation or round-the-clock cover. So that's one point, that how GMC is handling telemedicine. The second thing is about the patient requesting recording of the consultation in audio. Has doctor got the right to say no? Please enlighten us on this question.
Sure. In relation to telemedicine, I think this is producing quite a challenge for regulators because traditional regulators are very based around geography. Practice in the UK requires registration with us, and therefore we oversee that. I think some of the new arrangements that we're seeing, it's actually quite difficult sometimes to work out where the healthcare took place, because sometimes you have a doctor in a different jurisdiction providing services to another jurisdiction, the patient somewhere else. So I think it is a challenge, so we've got quite a bit of work going on at the moment. I think all of our focus is around geography and the register, and I think this is an area that's proving quite challenging for that. So I think over the next year or two we'll be starting to try and develop solutions to some of the more innovative services that we're starting to see that are quite global in nature. In relation to recording, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure we have an absolute policy on that. I think probably it's down to the relationship between the doctor and the patient, but it's not something I've come across recently. So it's absolutely something I could catch up with you if it's something you would really like our view on. I can speak to my colleagues and get a view on that.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other question, can I ask a question from you? Is GMC looking into separating the responsible officer and the medical director? There could be a conflict of interest. So are there any plans of looking into this?
So I think the responsible officer isn't a role of the GMC, it's a government role, even though it was designed to support revalidation. So we're not looking into it. It would be something the government would need to do. But we have had quite a lot of discussion about it, and I would say views are very split. About half the people think it's better if it's the same person, and the other half think it should be separated. And I think the issues are, if it's separated, sometimes it means that there isn't the sort of the influence at board level that I think you need in someone with that role. If you put it together, I think sometimes people feel there's a bit of a conflict between the responsible officer role and the medical director role. So I think there's a bit of 6 of one and half a dozen, and we're seeing different models appearing.
Thank you very much. I think next question.
Just a quick question. I'm a GP. I think recently in GP Alliance meeting, we were told that the patients will have access to the records as well. For example, we use System 1, and I think there are changes in the system that the patients can also see the records as well. So I think perhaps this is the way forward. Looks like they will be able to have access to the system.
I mean, I think in a way it's not a change, it will just make it much easier. So under the law, patients have the right, I think for £10, to write in and say, can I have a copy of all my records? Of course, that was a paper-based system. Probably a lot of patients don't do that. I think what's changing is more about digital access, and I think if it's made digitally available, many more patients will look at it than would write in and ask for a paper copy, and that will change. I think that will change practice. I couldn't emphasise enough how important records are. certainly if there is a complaint, everything goes back to the records. I know it's difficult in a busy, challenging practice to make sure you do keep records up to date. And I think obviously once patients have access to them, the amount of times they're going to raise questions about what's in the records will increase. So I think it will probably increase the focus of doctors on the records, but that might be a good thing. That does protect doctors at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very much, Anne, for your stimulating talk and very relevant to the doctors working in UK.